everybody, welcome back to Game Informer's Game Club. We are talking about the second half of Uncharted 4, A Thief's End. So at this point, if you have not finished the game, you should turn this off. Or if you just don't think you'll care about a lot of story spoilers, then keep listening. But we have a trimmed-down crew from last time. What is with our game clubs, Joe and Ben Reeves? Why do people trickle out every single time?
I just think people don't have the commitment that captains of gaming like Ben and I guess you to some degree.
It's true. Also have.
I think Joe smells.
We got Jeff Markiafava also here.
Hey.
Hero of the people. And joining the game club for the first time ever, my spiritual partner, Jeff Cork.
Well, I just watched the first episode of this game club.
Yeah.
So I can offer a lot of suggestions as to why people stopped attending. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, so you actually caught up. You watched that. I put a gun to your head just so you knew what we'd already talked about, what we hadn't. What did you think? Maybe that's a good place to start.
Oh, boy.
Going back and watching that after having finished the game, what stood out the most from our first conversation?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I just listened to it because I downloaded the YouTube video and played it in my car.
You know it's a podcast as well, right?
Okay.
In that case, you'd have to subscribe to the GI Show. And
it's all very complicated stuff.
So downloading
YouTube, that's simple.
But what did you think? Did you have thoughts? What stood out?
It was an interesting discussion. Yeah.
Were we way off base? Because I went back and watched the ending again to try and get a sense of where we thought this whole thing
you were
was
like,
heading.
this Sam, he's not a bad guy. I'm really interested in that. And his prison escape. What a dynamic sequence that was. That's exactly how it happened.
Maybe that's a good place to start. We got an email from Paul Arias who writes in, when I watched your game club, I had to laugh a bit because I'd already finished the game a week after release. Sam lied, you guys. Sam lied.
What? Well, no If you finish the game, you know the ending. Good job. Real prescient of you there, sir.
But it's interesting. We talked about Sam's turning bad. It's going to be terrible. I was saying there might be like a Metal Gear Solid 3 moment where you have to put your brother down, slowly inject a needle behind the ear.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also to talk about how and I think a couple people were with me a little bit talking about that prison escape set up with the drug lord. That did it for me the least. It was so silly to me.
It didn't feel realistic. It felt like completely out of character for everybody involved. Like you were saying in the first episode, which I listened to in my car after downloading it on YouTube. Sure. Is this why is this rich drug lord super into this treasure? It doesn't make any sense. And then the way that he was kicked you out of the car was I'll be in touch. And then just
yeah.
You're like, this is an absurd setup. And
it's
then
like
you
the
realize,
writers pulled it out of thin air and it did not make any sense and did not fit within the coherence of this story.
It would have been fun, maybe if you're a weirdo like I am. I think you'll be on board with this. If you could have been asked a bunch of those questions as Drake and then replayed that sequence as it just falls apart logically. And you're like, wait a second. You're kind of like a Call of Juarez.
Right, gunslinger situation.
This doesn't make any sense. So one guy came and then he blew up all these guys and...
One thing about that I liked, we had sort of talked about in the last discussion about how we thought that, I think we're all at various places on the spectrum. No one was taking Sam at face value. Everyone sort of expected some sort of twist there. And I was maybe a little more on the end of I thought things were going to get a little more sinister with him than they did.
Absolutely.
And after I finished it, I ended up I was really thankful they didn't for a lot of reasons. I think one of them was I like the fact that Naughty Dog stuck to its guns to tell the kind of story that
fits the Uncharted universe.
Yeah, but I guess more than that, I guess is they're willing to defy the expectation that things get dark. You know, the fact, because I think that with a setup like this, with two brothers sort of raised growing up in different ways, essentially, I think that there's a kind of narrative convention to generate a sort of easy out to generate drama is just to really put those two characters at odds at some point.
You left me to die.
Yeah, well, exactly.
It's really interesting. I don't know if you guys went back and watched the first trailer, which was just kind of like a camera going over the maps and whatnot. But on the Uncharted 4 cover story trip, I asked Neil Druckmann about that trailer specifically, and he pointed out that trailer isn't canon anymore. And it's interesting to go back and listen to it now because it is a different actor, but it is Sam Drake's character being you left me rotting in that prison for 15 years.
Yeah.
You owe me. It's very sinister. Clearly, this is the big bad for the game, is the brother figure. And it's also interesting to see interviews with the Naughty Dog developers now talking about how they were happy to kind of tease that expectation about things going dark. And I think people coming off of Last of Us specifically were expecting things to get dark. So when this game ends up like, Sam's kind of shady, but ultimately he's on your side. He's a good guy. No one dies except for Rafe getting treasure dropped on his head. Thumbs up. This is Uncharted. Rock on. Dun, 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 dun.
And that's and I think like that is what I like so much about it, is that not just like, oh, we're not going to go dark, but actually in avoiding that sort of confrontation, like good versus evil kind of thing with the two brothers, they ended up telling a story that felt a lot more believable and natural and interesting than if they had sort of manufactured that that rivalry there or whatever.
Yeah. Going off that, Rick from Southampton, Massachusetts wrote in. He says, I couldn't believe Elena. By the way, we're jumping right to the end here, but we can go back in time. There's a lot to cover in this second half. But Rick from Massachusetts writes in, he says, I couldn't believe Elena was casually talking to Sam on the dock. This was the jerk that lied to her husband and almost got everybody killed. That was not believable in my opinion. The last chapter with the daughter was okay, but is obviously a device to reminisce about the Uncharted franchise. Overall, I liked it, but it kind of fizzled out at the end for me. Did that strike you as weird, the Elena-Sam chat?
That didn't, but I felt like Elena let Nathan off the hook too easily. Throughout, kind of like once they get back together and Nathan's kind of just acting like, oh, I'm in the doghouse, I'm sorry.
Right.
There were a couple, I think, really meaningful conversations with him when he's kind of reflecting, and they also kind of tie it into when they're finding the pirates and all the betrayal and stuff. And I think he comes to some realizations during that, but it seemed like Elena got over it really quickly.
I didn't like when she pops up too. I was certain that he was going to have like a conversation and then it would cut back and it was like he was talking to like a mop that had washed ashore or something like that. Because like it just seemed like
love
her
to this
presence
mop.
there seemed so absurd in that moment.
Yeah,
How did
because
that
he-
even happen?
He just
yeah.
like conked his head after like falling off a cliff. You know, it
Yeah.
was like a Homer Simpson.
Yeah, there's going to be
all the
like
way
a
down.
Wilson from Castaway moment where it's,
Yeah, and
Also, I thought it was a weird place to cut. I feel like it would have been much more dramatic if he just would have fallen off that cliff after the whole Sam blew out, the big Sam reveal. By the way, I should point out, Sam was working with Rafe the whole time. That's what we've been kind of talking around.
Yeah.
But after he fell off, I thought they should just cut back to the past then, because then it goes back to them breaking into
that
the
old
house.
yeah,
It would have
yeah.
been much cooler, but like to kind of just show you like, oh no, he's fine and Elena's there. It was a weird structure.
Like
for
I
that.
liked the sequence, but it did feel like it was a little out of place. Like she comes across Drake, starts like swabbing at his head, and then he just immediately launches into the story. Okay, here's the deal. One time, my brother and I, we played hooky from school, and we broke into this house.
then-
and
and
I
then-
put this helmet on.
That didn't bug me so
I
much.
think you're meant to fill in some blanks there in terms of
Yeah.
how they got to telling that story and things like that. I don't know
Yeah.
if the idea is like, oh, I woke up, okay, let me tell you something, honey.
And it's nice that it just picks up on the very end after that chapter. So the idea is that they were slowly being walked through
It
that.
more just felt convenient that she was there more than anything else. That she suddenly showed up, like you were talking about.
It's very
is
silly.
the
A lot of
thing.
people wrote in like that's a real stretch, but I guess we'll go along.
But
with it.
that's the entire series too, right? Like you're always exploring something that no one has ever been to except for the giant platoon of guys that you're going to fight. And
Yeah.
every other main character in the story is going to pop up at that
They all
moment,
solve the pirate puzzles to get there to
They all
prove their
figured it out
worth to Henry
together.
Avery.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always exactly 20 seconds behind you, and they burst into the doors. And
Right.
we'll take it from here, Drake.
Or they somehow find ways to get where you are without having to go through all the puzzles and crap.
Yeah,
Well,
like,
they're
I-
following you. You did it all for them.
Well, no, but in some cases, I don't remember if this was first half or second half. Like when they're in that room with the thing on the pedestal in the center or something, and like it's like, Sam and Nate have to go through this whole rigmarole to get there, and then all of a sudden it's just like, boom, explosions. All right, they're right there. They just like come through the wall or something.
Yeah, and like 75% of the time you completely destroy whatever you're going through, and yet still they somehow
And of course,
get past there.
this
too.
is us sort of splitting hairs over details of like a series that is sort of just blatantly like, don't think about it too much and just have fun.
Well,
So-
Charles writes in on that topic, actually, about thinking about this game too much. He has an interesting theory. He says, hey, GI crew, let me start by just gushing about how much I love this final installment in the series. It stands out to me as one of the most authentic marriage relationships portrayed in a video game. I agree.
Yep.
The only detraction from its glory was that returning feeling that it sometimes pushes the extreme situations beyond my ability to suspend my disbelief. Then it hit me. Nathan Drake exists in the same universe as Jet Li's The One. Each loading screen was not resetting the timeline, but rather moving me over to the next multiverse where my new Drake had absorbed that life energy. Granted, I'm sure that I went through more than 124 Drakes, but by the end of the game, I'd achieved an almost godlike status as the last remaining Drake. Suspension of disbelief reestablished.
Also, the last remaining fan of The One.
Actually, no, I am a big fan of that movie.
I've never seen
Figures.
that one, but I remember the premise.
It
about
is
that.
so cool.
There's only 120 dimensions then? in
Yeah,
that
there's like a
universe?
finite number of parallel universes, and what this is, we can have the one discussion club. at
Yeah,
another
let's really
point.
dig into this.
But
We should start out just on. Please.
before we do, I wanted to issue an official retraction
Oh,
from
please.
something that I said in the last episode.
Is it the butt joke about
Where-
what a thieves' end is? Because I appreciate you retracting that. Yeah.
I accept your apology.
It's
Thank
so we had someone write in talk about how, just on the subject of suspension of disbelief, how bothered they were by the fact that like whenever you need to get somewhere, there's just like, oh, there's a crate or something like really convenient nearby. And last discussion, I sort of used the excuse like, don't think about it too much. It's Uncharted. It never really bothered me. In the second half of the game, there were some super conspicuous crates
Yeah, it
that
comes up a lot
really
more in the
started to
second
bother
half.
me. in
Yeah.
this.
It's absurd.
Yeah, especially if like, and it's one thing. I think it wouldn't bother me so much if they altered them somehow. Where
It's always
like,
a crate on wheels.
yeah, it's like casters on this crate that's been here since like the 1800s.
Oh, the pirates crate, the legendary
Yeah.
loot.
That
Yeah.
was like Libertalia's main export was caster wheels.
Yeah.
Apparently.
So like that to me, it's not so much the repetition of like, yeah, because like in The Last of Us, that was the problem of like, you need to get anywhere, you just like pull this thing here and jump up and like
Yeah.
the repetition of it. In this, it wasn't the repetition of the action so much. It's just like create some different objects that serve the same purpose. But why is it always a crate on casters?
It's
That
really
bothered me.
absurd. And like
It's all
I
the
saw,
pirate roadies.
Yeah.
They need to get their equipment.
I saw an interview with Neil Druckmann where he was talking about it, and he's like, well, we just need those characters to bond, and we need you to interact in a gameplay sense with people. But it just ends up, it's one of my main downsides too. With The Last of Us, I'm totally with you, but this as well. It just feels like Army of Two moments sprinkled in otherwise what I think is a really, really brilliant game, and then just, help me hold this door because it'll create some emotional attachment. It's like, but just have some good dialogue.
I don't know
and
what
that's
if it did,
enough.
though. Yeah, I don't
What
know
I think
if
that
bugged me.
they do is smart though is that a lot of times where you push a crate over and you help a friend up and then they will go away for a little bit, and you're kind of watching them interact. So it's not just a matter of like, hey, give them a boost and then they lower their arm down and then pull you up. So I mean,
Right.
it seems like a little more engaging than that. I mean, after
Yeah.
a while you'll notice this happens an awful lot though.
There was a couple scenes where it's like Elena like grabs you and you're like, I feel like it's gonna rip her arm off. Like,
Oh, you didn't see that?
yeah, I missed that scene.
Yeah, it's
Is
terrible.
that DLC?
In the second half, I thought there were more conspicuous moments of like, hey, let me try and get something to help you up. And it's like, you have a rope. You have that rope on your belt.
Especially like, I mean, the biggest moment is when it ties into the story. When Nate's like, I'm going after Sam. We got to go after Sam after
Yeah.
he's like committed to go. Basically, the Last Crusade moment of like, I can reach it. I can go. I can reach it to go get the treasure. And then he's just up on this little wall. And Sully and Elena are like, well, there's no way for us to get over this.
Yeah.
Look around, there's like 30 barrels.
Yeah.
You can climb on anything. He has a rope. Just lower it right there.
And I looked at that cart that fell down. It just lost one wheel. It's like you guys could move a whatever.
Just grab some of those caster wheels and
Nothing we can do, kiddo. That's a terrible Sully.
Yeah,
but it's
just
my
go,
best.
that's what that was? Yikes.
Emmett from Massachusetts writes about that moment specifically saying, this is his favorite moment. For me, the best moment, without a doubt, is after Sam runs off to get the treasure before Rafe does, and Nate chases after him. The awesome sense of finality and epic tension as Chapter 21, Brother's Keeper, scrawled across the screen, and the music became low and ominous gave me chills. My heart was beating loudly as I played through probably the best platforming section of the game towards what I could tell was the end of my favorite series in all of gaming.
That one's cool too because it's one of the few times he's alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's talking to himself and he refers to like a crazy guy talking to himself or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice to be by yourself a little bit. I think there's a little bit too much talking to himself. People always talk about how he's nuts for killing all these people, but I think he'd also be legally insane for how much he comments on himself, including one comment where he goes, this is harder than it looks. Where it's like, who are you talking to? Talk about like breaking the fourth wall. Like, what the hell are you talking? You're talking to a bird? Like, so stupid.
I did like there was some line where he's like, did you come this way? Probably not.
Yeah.
I also like there's that like, I don't know what they call it, the pickaxe or something. It's like a pick he gets at some
Pecan,
point.
I think it's called,
Yeah, the
something like that.
pecans he get to use in his climbing. And I liked diving off a wall and digging that thing into the like rock face and like you create a huge gash.
I
as
think you
slide
just like
down.
Rise of the Tomb Raider.
That's right.
Yeah. No, it is
That's
very
what I
much-
was playing.
But I'm totally with you. They showed that in that PSX demo years ago, and it stood out to me so much. It's like when he slams that little pecan in, and then it like creates that groove. And there's a couple cool moments with that. And then like when they eventually stack all the mechanics up on top of each other, where you're like sliding and then swinging to like a pecan stab. I think
And
that's
then you use the rope or whatever. Yeah.
right. But on your point, Joe, about things being more conspicuous and annoying, I think the more casually you use that rope, the stronger it is. When it's like, oh, there's a battle and there's like a little place you can swing and might get a good punch out of it or something.
Yeah.
But it really stood out to me in the second half as well, specifically that dumb waterfall moment in the Jeep when Elena and Nate are getting close to the waterfall. And it's like, don't worry, Nate's going to go over this waterfall. But there is a certain dangling branch that you can use the rope on just over it perfectly. And it's like, what? Who installed that there? It's just the gaminess kind of catches up with this game every once in a while.
Yeah, I guess in that one I would go back to my like don't think about it too much.
Yeah, just have fun.
Just have fun, everybody. I think that was my big takeaway from this game in general is it's so smart with the writing and dialogue and the performances. And I feel like that pillar is kind of overshadowing gameplay mechanics in a way. So it's a strange feeling, and I've never really felt it in a game before, but because the dialogue and they want to keep it so honest, because that sentiment is so strong, that the characters find themselves commenting on the gameplay so much that it almost feels like it's mocking the gameplay. Like there's so many comments about like, oh my god, this is what you do all the time. Oh great, here's some more jumping. Oh great, here we got to push another thing. Like they need to keep that honesty going, so they have to comment on the gameplay, but it just kind of drives home the fact that games are still not realistic and a little bit silly at times.
I mean, are there any games that do that well though, or is it just that there's
just
few games that have a story of this caliber?
I think a game
and so you don't notice it in other games.
Yeah, I think a game as ambitious as this, there's still going to be that repetition. And to have that level of repetition and also these honest portrayals, you need to comment on the repetition a fair amount.
Yeah.
And it's this interesting dynamic that I've never really seen in a game before. Jeff, what stood out to you in the second half?
I actually like the combat more in the second half. I think there were some sequences where I didn't mind it as much. You still have the ones where basically anytime you come into a big area where there are just a ton of guys patrolling, I was still like, oh god, I gotta try and sneak through all this, and eventually they're gonna see me and more guys are gonna come in. But then there were a couple sequences where I guess I can't remember specifically, but you're like getting chased out of somewhere and the gunplay is fast enough that like one of the giant armored cars comes back again, and I actually thought that was a lot of fun. And stuff,
But something we didn't point out last time is that you're playing on
cheating,
super baby light gun mode.
Well, it was the second easiest difficulty mode, but then it gives you the option to turn on like the auto aim or whatever.
Yeah.
And at first when I saw
I did that also. That's exactly how
interesting.
I'm playing. Yeah.
when I first saw that, I was like, I don't need it that easy. You know, I just don't want to have to shoot a guy 100 times before he dies.
Yeah.
But then after, like 2 hours, I turned it on and just never looked back. It is so much better. And I think it fits with the vibe of the story and kind of, the tone of like, you're basically supposed to be Indiana Jones or whatever.
Right.
Like Nathan Drake should be able to just like instantly aim and shoot a bunch of guys as you're running through these environments.
Just mow dudes
Yeah,
down.
that
just
was
like
exactly
Indiana
my
Jones.
rationale for it too. Is like I'm playing, and we talked about this before, but like I play Uncharted largely as a more cinematic experience. So it's like I like the idea of just like popping up from cover, shoot, getting down, taking care of guys. I don't like the like, oh, I missed. Oh, let's line up a headshot. All right.
If I wasn't capturing the footage for the YouTube version of this that you can see on the side of the screen, I would have done that too, but I didn't want the internet to mock me and say, you don't even play Uncharted right.
There was one sequence of like all the crashed pirate ship area. Remember that sequence?
Yes,
I thought that action sequence went on a little bit too long.
Even though the music was amazing.
Yeah,
if you
and I
know what
loved
I'm saying,
the area. It looked cool.
Yeah, I'm
but-
totally with you. That was just that gunfight where it's like, I just don't want to do this anymore.
At the end of every gunfight, it was just I got a sense that I was relieved that was done.
Yeah.
So then I could move on to the next exciting sequence where you're moving around. I think the platforming
Yeah,
is really
platforming
strong.
is good.
you
I
never
could've done
got
that
sick
for
of the
a long time.
platforming? There's
I
never...
mean, there are moments where okay, I feel like I've done this before, but I think it was. I did more like the combat felt more repetitious than the platforming, where it was just like, oh, look, it's that asshole with the shotgun.
Yeah.
Take his legs out.
And part of the platforming is like, for me, part of the fun isn't the actual, like part of what keeps the platforming fresh isn't the fact that what you're doing like jumping to this ledge or swinging on this thing. It's the reward after the platforming, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not the act of jumping around and stuff that's fun. It's the act of like gonna get up there and then like see what's up there, what's in that cave.
Yeah.
That sort of like sense of the area unfolding is what makes that fun.
Yeah, as I was playing through this game, I kept thinking about like what's propelling me forward. It's like I want those cutscenes. The platforming, I think, it's fine to me, but it's not like this is Uncharted, baby. The gunplay, I'm not really into, and I always thought back to like this quote that Tim Schafer had, where he was talking about like what the motivation was in old adventure games, where it's like you don't have the RPG sense of progression really, and he's like, after thinking about it a lot, it turns out the reward in those old games is just seeing new environments. And he realized like it's basically the same with this modern action adventure game. Like I just want to see new environments, seeing like Libertalia for the first time, getting to walk around that abandoned town. I thought was super cool.
Yeah, the moment where you sit down and have a drink, like a pretend drink with your brother.
Yeah, that was
You
great.
have like an extended conversation.
I think I missed that. Is that
Was this optional?
Yeah, there's just like a chair and you hit triangle, and then you and your brother sit down and like clink glasses and just
Pretend there's
have this
ale in 'em and
beautiful
you-
view.
Yeah.
and,
Oh,
like,
that sounds great.
You just talk.
pretty good?
It's cool.
Yeah.
Dang it. Let's see. Ryan Kavanaugh writes in about one of his interesting notes on the gameplay. He says, after clearing the area filled with broken ships in Chapter 20, No Escape, a shoreline truck chases Nate. Did you notice the similarities between this sequence and the Crash Bandicoot level you play in Chapter 4? Nathan is running towards the camera, leaping over waist-high fences, yada, yada, yada. Clink. But I noticed there's also a moment with Elena where you're running towards the camera as well. And I was like waiting for them to make some reference like, remember when we were playing on the couch? This is just like that.
I should have packed my jean shorts.
I can still beat your high score.
Okay, this is on a slightly different subject.
Yeah.
Is that all right? I wanted to. So I was digging around for some like Easter eggs and stuff that I might have missed. Did you guys know that like Elena's like her license plate on her truck is basically like
NRA forever?
no. It's like Elena, except sort of flipped upside down in Elite speak. So it's like 373.
The car
You know
she
what?
steals.
This is the
basically?
Jeep?
Yeah.
rental car?
Yeah, the Jeep that she has like is basically her name is flipped upside down is the license plate.
Oh,
which
interesting.
is
What
kind
a-
of cool.
What a cool thing, Elena.
And then another little Easter egg that I loved was like when you first. This is like right when we start, like right at chapter 11, right where we set our cutoff point. It's like there's like a little like immigration office or something that you go to where there's a big long line and they're talking about like, oh, this looks terrible, and then there's some reference to like, oh, it's nothing like Arstotzka. It's like, oh yeah, don't remind me. Arstotzka is the fake country in Papers, Please.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
that's cool.
I missed
So,
that.
so there's this, so basically it's like this passport or immigration office or something that they're referencing being like, this looks bad, but it's not like this other place we were.
Yeah.
Which scene was that? I don't remember that.
It was like right when you come in, I think it's
is
right
chapter
at the beginning
11.
of chapter 11, like when there's the town with like all of the, you're going to that like church or something in the distance and there's all those sort of like little shops and stalls and stuff. It's just sort of like off to the side. There's just like, it's just like a room you can go into. There's not really much that happens.
Something Sully says. Maybe?
Yeah, I know Neil and Bruce are big fans of Lucas Pope and Papers, Please and whatnot. My favorite Easter egg, well, there's a couple actually, but I appreciated, I think it's when Sam and Nathan are running around together again, and there's some reference like, oh, watch out for that first step. I'm like, let me guess, it's a doozy. Little Groundhog Day reference.
Yeah, I like the fact that
Everybody
he
in
saw
there.
Groundhog Day while he was in prison.
Yeah, I wish that instead of Crash or in prison, I see. Yeah, they maybe just had it on it was just looping
It's like
constantly.
movie night. Because he's a drug lord, they wheel in the AV cart. Hey,
every
by the
night.
way, you kept referring to the Crash Bandicoot sequence as being an Easter egg.
It's not.
It's absolutely not an Easter egg.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry if I called it an Easter egg.
Several
How
times.
dare
I'm
you.
so upset.
Because Easter eggs have to be hidden and optional, and
Yeah, I drove my car off the road. I
they
was so
don't
mad.
shove Easter eggs at you twice in a game.
It doesn't work in
specifically.
real
Wait,
life,
how
as
did
it
you
turns
listen to
out.
the last podcast, Court?
Well, let me explain.
What did you guys think about the Easter egg? And a lot of people were talking about it on the internet about having Guybrush Threepwood from
the painting?
Monkey Island in here. Did you guys catch that?
Yeah.
I heard about it like after I'd already played that section.
Okay.
So, but it sounds cool.
They make some reference. There's like when they show the paintings of all the pirates, there's one without a name. Later on, you see, I think they show like a G and a U on one of like the scraped off paintings. But he's one of the founders of this
Yeah.
whole organization.
There's still,
and
like-
later, you get to see Guybrush's skeleton sitting at that table, which is a little bit alarming.
Yeah, it's all cartoony. That was the weird part.
Yeah, exactly. It was pixelated. It really stood out. Let's see. Cork, you were really in love with this game. We haven't really
I
addressed
loved
that.
it. I thought it was fantastic.
So you just played through all of them as well. We
I
talked about it
did.
on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. One quick thing, and this is one of those like embarrassing things. Like, is it possible that I missed a mechanic the entire time? And in which case, I would like to apologize. You can't throw grenades back in this one, could you? Like you could in Uncharted 3.
Oh, interesting.
Because
Oh,
that was
I
like a
don't know.
mechanic that like a little meter would pop up in Uncharted 3, and then if you hit the button at the right time when it was in the white spot, then you would throw the grenade back. And as far as I can tell, you get the indicator but
I so rarely
the best case
had
scenario is you will run
grenades
into an
to
explosion.
deal with.
Yeah, I was playing on such an easy mode. Maybe they just didn't throw grenades at me very often.
Anyway, I missed that.
Yeah, I never saw a prompt or anything for that.
I'm
either.
going to look like a huge asshole if it was like, that's like the easiest thing. You just hit.
Yeah, you just had to do it, Corey.
But anyway,
Oh,
I missed that.
I mean, it's weird because like there's definitely not like a tutorial about doing it, even if you can. So
Yeah.
I feel like they tutorialize so much of like everything you can do in that game. It's kind of it would be weird if you could and they.
Yeah,
don't
Sam
let
would have
you.
yelled it out so many times.
Yeah.
Throw it back,
little brother.
Oh, look at us. Are we brothers?
We
I
talked
got all the recessive genes.
somebody wrote in and says, Zach K from Austin, Texas. Love the podcast. But let's get right to the nitty gritty here. No one has mentioned in the Uncharted 4 game club yet that young Sam Drake looks exactly like Conan O'Brien. I couldn't take any of the flashbacks seriously as I expected Andy Richter to pop out of every vase.
Young Nathan Drake?
Young Sam Drake.
Young Sam Drake. I can't be the only one who noticed this, right? I think you are actually, Zach.
I wouldn't call it noticing as much as I would imagining.
Sure. Let's jump around a little bit. What did you guys think about that flashback sequence? I think it was just called Brothers Drake, where you're going through the house.
That was awesome.
I liked it. So did anybody else just wear like hats through most of the house?
There were
two
I
that I
wore like
found.
a
I found
samurai
2.
hat most of the
There
way,
were
and then I
3,
found
yeah.
another one.
Oh, there were 3 in there? Oh, interesting. Yeah, I loved also just like the spinning the globe thing and then stopping. It's like, oh, that reminds me of my childhood where I spent dozens of hours spinning a dumb globe and slamming my finger
middle
down.
of the Indian Ocean.
And also
That's
that
where we're
puzzle
going.
later was spinning the globe.
Oh, also in the realm of foreshadowing, apparently one of like Neil Druckmann's biggest regrets with this game is in that chapter. Originally, there was like a fake sword fighting sequence where you and Sam each get swords, and that would teach you the mechanics for the end.
They
boss
really
then.
could have used that.
They
That
certainly
would have
could
helped
have.
a lot.
A
man.
lot
thing-
of people complained about that.
One thing I want to get to about that flashback before we talk about the end boss,
Sure.
is this is another thing that from a story perspective, the fact that like, all right, we're robbing this lady's house. She finds us just long enough to give us some important backstory.
Yeah.
And then like then keels over just as the police are like that's another one of those.
Well, that's
like,
what she was living for, and so then finally,
Yeah.
It reminded me of like that Seinfeld where the kid keeps calling Elaine thinking it's like his nanny or something.
Yeah.
She's like, all right, I'm dead now. Okay, bye. I'm dead now forever. It's basically just that sequence.
That happened to me actually, so I found it pretty believable. Actually, what was interesting to that about that sequence is like that's how they find out, or we find out that their name isn't Drake.
Right, which they've hinted at.
Have they?
In
I
the
guess I've
past,
missed
yeah.
that.
Cork,
So-
you just played through them again. Do you remember how they hinted at it?
I don't recall that.
Okay.
I
So-
think what it is before they'd hinted. I was just reading about this. Like, I forget which installment it was in, but like they had hinted at it as like Drake, like Nathan had given himself that name as sort of
Yeah.
like not rebranding, but like sort of reimagining himself as this great explorer. When I guess like in this game you find out it's not so much of like a conscious like this is who I'm going to be sort of thing as much as it is like hey we're need to change our name because we need to escape kind of thing.
And that was the story he was telling Elena. So is that the first time she finds out that his name really isn't
Yeah.
Drake?
Yeah, I think so. You think she would have asked that
Yeah, you'd be like,
earlier.
I don't know. I just felt like that should have been more of like a surprise for other people or
We got a
something.
lot of comments on that section specifically. Barbara writes in and says, throughout the series, we'd been teased that Drake isn't actually Nate's last name. We finally learned that their mother's name was Cassandra Morgan, and she was an adventurer like her sons. Who really was Cassandra Morgan? Who is Nate and Sam's father? Why did he abandon his sons and get rid of their mother's stuff? What sense did you guys get from that little Gone Home sequence about the Drake family?
I did want to know more about their dad. Like I
Yeah.
appreciated the stuff we got about their mom, which is actually pretty cool.
That she's an adventurer.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And the old lady they meet, but I was like, who is this old lady other than their mom's boss?
Well, Margarito Granados writes in and says, is it possible that Evelyn, the old lady, is Nate
is the
and Sam's
dad?
great-grandmother? She's definitely old enough to be Nate's great-grandmother. I mean, hell, she knew Amelia Earhart.
Oh man,
I mean,
I
don't
don't think that's the case.
they pretty much clarify that they're that's not the
she's
case.
like she worked for me. I think she would have said like, yeah, but she was my daughter.
Yeah,
And
I,
she
mean, I
made-
guess I don't see a reason for there to be a lie there. I don't see a reason for there to be
Right.
some facade.
And she ended up marrying a Japanese man and whatnot, going through those stories. It was
Yeah.
also very Gone Home.
That was also kind of cool. Gone Home.
yeah, it's like as you're working through the house, you work your way chronologically through this relationship as it's changing throughout the letters.
Was there information in there about their mom's parents too? I felt like there was like multiple generations that you were going through.
Well, I think a lot of it was relating to Evelyn.
Yeah, I thought it was mainly just about the family in that house.
Yeah.
So the family in the house, and not.
and not the Morgan.
There were little bits, and like throughout it, I think Nate and Sam would talk about how much of a dickhole their dad was and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then when you find the stuff at the end,
So was their dad still alive? Is that the impression you got?
I don't know. Yeah, that's unclear. I would assume not. I would assume Nathan, once he got a taste for blood, went and brutally murdered his father.
Oh, that sounds
I
right.
think they
the
wanted-
first kill.
Yeah, they want to imply that. I did like in that sequence when the old lady draws the gun on him, and it's a nice bit of mirroring. It's like poetry, it rhymes, where Sam like steps in front of Nathan to take the shot, which also happened on the cliffside, which I also want to point out to keep my Incredibles analogy going from last time. It was also very much like that scene in Incredibles where Mr. Incredible grabs Mirage, and he's like, "I'll snap her neck." And Cinder's like, "Go ahead and do it. I know you won't. You're the hero." And there's that exact scene with Rafe where he's like, "Go ahead and shoot Nadine. I know
Yeah.
you won't. You're the
Well,
hero."
Also, that wasn't your Incredibles analogy. That was someone on Twitter, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Somebody
but
wrote
okay.
in. But
I
still.
cited Harry Mackin, former Game Informer intern. with
Okay.
that,
I
with
just
that
wanted to
whole
make sure.
saga.
I think
Keeping you honest.
it was interesting how well that like backstory stuff was incorporated too. There was a nice like, okay, this is where he got the journal, where he became obsessed with Sir Francis Drake. You know, here's a sketch of the ring that's obviously a huge part of the beginning, and like he's had that ring around his neck since the beginning of the series, and then it's also you see how he got it in Uncharted 3. You know, when he stole it, but then I don't know. I just like to see how everything connected, whether or not it was just like coincidence they were able to make it work, how much of it was planned in advance.
And-
Which brings me to a question though: is
Yeah.
like, didn't they record or have scripted a bunch of stuff for Uncharted 4 originally before Amy Hennig left,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this was completely retooled, right? So I would
It's
like
kind
to
of
know
rebooted. Certain sections stayed.
what, like,
roughly
do you
the
know
same.
any of that? Like, what changed? in,
Not
like some of the story
specifically.
beats.
They've been pretty cagey. The story beats, I mean, outside of Sam presumably from that trailer being
bad,
secretly
maybe
evil
more
and whatnot.
bad,
yeah, we don't really know too much about it.
It seems like a huge like that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I remember on the trip they talked about how they kind of narrowed down some of the gameplay areas. Like originally it was a little bit more open. It was even a wider linear, as they like to say. But yeah, not much.
Just jumping back real quick to that conversation that you're talking about, I also liked how it really fleshed out Sam's motivation as well. That you find out, like, okay, he's not just obsessed with this pirate because he wants a bunch of money. Like, basically, this was his mom's legacy. And,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
as the older son, you can kind of see how that would matter more to him than potentially Nathan. And
It has that classic thing of, playing through the first three games, being like, well, why wouldn't Drake constantly be mentioning like this Avery treasure? Because clearly it's important to the family history and whatnot. Like this is like the ultimate thing that he's never mentioned before, but presumably it's in the back of his mind the entire
Yeah.
time. But like this is the real score we got to get to.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it's just because, like, his brother died on that hunt, and so he's like, I don't want to ever go
Could
back
be.
to that
Yeah.
again.
I don't-
kind of forget about it.
On episode 1 of this game club, you kind of mentioned
How did you listen to that?
Shut up.
I love you, Reeves.
All right, so you mentioned the kind of the parallels with The Last of Us's expansion or the DLC
Yeah,
for it. You
yeah.
know how like the squirt gun fight and everything. I think the way that the photographs
Yep.
were incorporated also was really clever. Even though in The Last of Us you could integrate with Facebook, which made it even better.
Right, in the Left Behind DLC. Yeah.
Behind DLC,
But then
but-
absolutely you take the little photograph
Yep, you're
in
like,
the house as
and then
kids.
that's like the big stinger, not a stinger, but I mean it's like a nice moment at the end,
Yeah.
end where your daughter finds that photograph of you and your brother, and you happen to be wearing a samurai hat because you made the decision to wear that.
And I assume it's customized based on what hat you want
Yeah,
to
Yeah,
wear.
I wasn't wearing a hat.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
I
I guess it
didn't,
would
I didn't have it.
Yeah,
Oh.
I think that clearly those guys are really into photographs.
Yeah,
And
you have to
the
YouTube that
character-
ending to see that hat, though, Joe. Seriously,
Yeah, I hear
I'm
it's
not
just
messing
that
around.
hat.
That's great.
I wanted to go back to something. You're talking about, Amy Hennig and being a part of this before and stuff. So in the credits, there's that section that's, like
Dedicated to her memory.
Jesus Christ! No, but it's like, hey, thank you for your
contribution.
contribution.
it
Seemed
says
like a
hey,
classy,
it
thing.
says with sincere thanks to Amy Hennig for her contributions for the Uncharted franchise. Which at first I'm like, oh, that's not, like Ben said, that's pretty classy. And then something rung a little weird with it for me because, like, by all rumors, that was a pretty acrimonious split.
We
right?
don't really know. It seems there's some story there that we don't really know.
So are you saying like the fact that she's listed in the credits doesn't seem as genuine?
I guess I was wondering if anyone else had that vibe or something. Because I mean,
Well,
maybe
even if
it's
it
just
is acrimonious. Like, what's the problem with taking a classy route and just being like, hey, put past behind us, like, thanks a lot.
and I like that. And I guess I hope that it's genuine and not just sort of a like, well, people are going to expect this.
It's a story that I can't wait to hear all the details years and years from now.
Yeah.
And I really want to know, like, seriously, to go back to it, I want to know what her vision for Uncharted 4 was.
Yeah. And not even necessarily that it would have been like better or worse or whatever, but
No,
like
it's just so
just the
different.
idea of like an
Yeah.
alternate version of this game, I think would be.
And we'll
fun
find
to
out,
hear.
I think, when Amy's old and has a gun. And then we break into her house.
break into her
and
house.
she
No.
Explains the entire story and then goes on
I'll
to
paint
wrestle.
freckles on my
death
face so I
sentence.
look like a little kid. It's gonna
Never
be great.
explain your life story.
I will say the little like PS at the end of the credits that said "F you" was a little bit uncalled for. But
Great. Thanks, Reeves. Appreciate it.
You got problems.
So, going off
my
of favorite
aunt
moments.
has problems.
That's a callback. So let's see. Someone writes in and says, I actually have a tie for my favorite chapter to play in this game, which was something I asked. This is from John Gregory, former Game Informer intern.
Oh, what's up,
the
John?
first is chapter 17, For Better or Worse. Nate and Elena working through what they need to know. Through what they need to work through is some of the best writing in the series, and it's really interesting to see some of the enthusiasm come back into Nate after watching him deal with knowing he upset her. Her showing up there might be a little contrived, but it was worth it to me. And then he also really liked the epilogue, which we can get to later. But yeah, I think that might be my favorite. My favorite part of Uncharted 4 is just the Elena relationship and feeling new emotions in a game. Just like you mentioned, being put in the doghouse, the naughty doghouse. It's like I've never felt that as a protagonist in a game, or also the feeling after she shows up and storms off and Sully runs off with her. And Nate says, "Sullivan, take care of her." But
That's
just
a cool scene, though.
Yeah.
Like at the hotel in general.
Absolutely.
And I'm kind of disappointed that I saw that in a trailer.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
I wish that had just been a surprise.
And they have like her teary trying not to cry face. But real quick, like is after that, I thought it was so interesting when Nate and Sam continue on their adventure and just having the idea of Sam subtly trying to convince Nathan that like this is what he's good at and that he should be having a great time. Like, this is crazy, isn't it? Nathan's just like, all right, let's just keep going here. Like I've never heard a character so affected by something emotionally. It's so subtle, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too. And actually, because like that dialogue worked so well and it seemed like they were genuinely, there was some forgiveness happening there. There was a couple of scenes where he's like talking in front of all the dead skeleton bodies. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah,
When he's,
absolutely.
Like,
That
getting
scene
really
was one for me.
passionate about it, and you can see Elena's like looking like, oh yeah, he really likes this, and like that kind of like forgiveness
But
happening.
it wasn't a he. Yeah, I think it was sadder than that. And that scene specifically really stood out to me. And in the hotel scene, she actually has a line where she's like, I saw your face when you walked in that door. Like, I know that you love this stuff. And I feel like that was a more somber realization that, like, I've never seen him like this.
I think
Well,
when
there was just, I was just going to say, like, that scene in particular made me think, like, oh, well, they're wrapping things up and they're going to kill Elena. Like, I was sure, like, positive for a while that, like, Elena's going to die at the end.
I really like for me my favorite scene between those two was, and I know I'm not the only person to bring this up or whatever, but like the bonding scene when they're basically both in that Jeep, and then that music just swells up, and there's not some back and forth between them or whatever. Like it's a moment where for a series or like for a relationship that relies so heavily on like their banter and dialogue, it was a really great moment that sort of let the silence speak for itself.
Yeah.
Like, and so yeah, when that, I don't know what the track is called or whatever, but like for me, it's like, I'm someone who like, I appreciate when like good sound design in a game, but I tend to only notice it in those really big like standout moments.
Like the Red Dead Ride to Mexico, stuff like that.
Yeah, that kind of like the really big sort of like tentpole moments that sort of, I don't know, like ostentatiously use sound or like to really hammer it home. And that was one where it's just like really hit me as I was driving. I was just like, I love this.
Yeah, it's a really great moment. That's after chapter 17 that John Gregory says there, where there is a lot of tension, and it's a lot of Nathan trying to work with it and realizing that she was really mad. She had a couple great lines where she's like, "Yeah, I came back for you this time."
Yeah, I almost didn't. She said something like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
But that scene in particular, like after they worked through their problems, working through the Jeep and swinging off a waterfall and all that stuff, it brought home again something that the artist Naughty Dog really like to talk about. And I feel like a lot of people do this in animated films and whatnot as well, but just trying to like mirror the environment to what's happening emotionally inside the character. And so obviously when Drake is at his lowest point, like crawling on the island. It's this crazy storm. That's a very obvious example.
Yeah.
But then also just having that moment where their relationship's a little bit more patched over, and then you get like the uplifting music and the green grass. It's like a minute-long sequence, but it is really memorable.
Yeah, I think this game does a really good job of kind of getting me on board with the Nathan and Elena relationship, which up until this point has fallen completely flat for me. I think that we're with Drake, and he's a really engaging, exciting character. And I think Elena, to me, the whole time up until 4 has always felt like when you've got a friend who's super outgoing and funny, and they're with someone that you're just like, I don't know, maybe when you're alone with her, she's really great, but I just don't see it. Whatever, I mean, obviously there's some kind of spark there, but she hasn't ever really held her own. She's always just kind of been like the Kate Capshaw, romantic interest, where it's just like, you're just a foil more than anything else. You're like, you are a thing that gets wounded so that I can carry you along. You are a person that like has a few like incompetent moments so that I can seem stronger.
That
and
I have to go rescue.
Yeah, and here you see like there's the moment like where she's on the elevator with the Jeep, for instance, and like you're working. He's like, oh crap, they're just gonna tear her apart. And then you're like, she just hauls ass out of there and like runs over the guys.
Yeah,
and,
that seems good.
And they refer to like the fact that you're good at this. You are good at this, Elena. Like we are good. We're a good team. It's like, and I think that I was completely on board with it now. And I think that I look at the past games, which I think were great in their own ways, but I think that it'll probably color the way that I look at that pairing too in some ways.
Yeah.
Which
Brad
is a
Dame,
little unfair.
yeah. Brad Dame writes in on a similar note. He says, overall, I think Uncharted 4 is the best game in the series. I want to point out just how good the writing and voice work is here in particular. After Elena and Nathan have their fight, I loved how right after that, Nathan was noticeably upset, but not showing it. The one-liners stopped for a while, and you could feel the heaviness in Nathan's voice, as well as some of the desperation in Sam's voice as he tried to cheer him up. It was subtle but effective. I have to say, though, not a lot of the gameplay moments are sticking out to me in this later half. That's from Brad. But yeah, the Elena stuff I was really riveted by. I love the sound of her voice. Some of like the combat barks and whatnot from her, maybe some of the weaker voice acting in the game, but I was still really fascinated by that relationship. And a lot of people wrote in and complained about this, and maybe it's just because I was playing on easy that I didn't notice it too much, but I really actually loved the Mummy Bomb chapter. I loved it, which then at the end, mainly because they have that great moment where she pretends that she's dead and he's so distraught over it, but then there's this really sweet moment where she's like rubbing mud off his face. She's like, oh, you're all covered in mud. And then at the end of it, there's like good talk. It's really sweet.
I even like that scene too, where they get captured and they're hanging upside down. It's like, well, at least we're not blowing up, and then they start going off.
The scene is cool, but those mummy bombs were total horse.
I thought it
Earlier
was
in the level,
fine.
maybe.
Everyone was talking about like, oh, they're just constantly exploding, and I keep dying. I don't think I died from them
No,
once.
I never died once. Either.
Oh man, I died from them a couple times,
and
and
I
I
mean,
think
I
what's
got- Sure.
what's frustrating about it is that like
Getting talked
there's
over,
not
is that frustrating?
predictable. Like,
Right.
Like sometimes you walk by one, and then, like by what method are they triggered? I'm playing a game. I want to know what's happened because like I walk close to one and nothing happens, but then I take 2 steps behind it, and then it starts to fuse
And
up.
then you see the visual thing and you run away.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but
You
then
just
you
do a
run
little
away, and then
roll.
another one in front
and
of
then
you
you
goes,
roll
and
away.
then-
I thought it was fun where I'd roll one direction, be like, oh crap, I gotta roll another direction, and then like those weird rooms with all like the body parts dangling. I thought it was effed up, really cool.
that area, that the environments there were cool. The mechanics surrounding like the mummies were fresh, and it's not even like I was dying constantly. I probably died like 3 or 4 times total in that sequence. But like because each one, I just totally had no idea why or how it happened. It was
They're
frustrating
just
for
magic mummy bombs.
Yeah,
totally.
I guess.
Yeah.
I think that like when the person who wrote in saying that there wasn't like a big moment. I think that's what I think made this so strong was that the Libertalia stuff was like parsed out. The whole mystery came out in such a steady drip that you realize like, oh crap! Like you're led to believe this is this amazing pirate utopia for a very long time, and then you're there and you're like something went wrong here. And at least personally, I didn't see it happening. I think way ahead of time, it just kind of happened naturally, and I think it was fascinating. Because I always think like, oh, this guy's kind of like a One-Eyed Willie from Goonies, just this lovable scamp. And then you realize, oh no, this is just a straight up psychopath. Like something like clicked in this dude, and like it was all this horrible plan. He's like fooling everybody and ripping them all off. It was great.
Yeah, the sort of the breadcrumb trail that you follow in this, and the way that mystery sort of deepens as the game goes on, I think is the best in the series.
Yeah.
Also, sorry for cutting you off before.
No, it's
Jeff.
fine. And
Hey!
also,
Not you.
in terms of set piece moments too, like they didn't have the huge, you're dangling off a train or whatever, but I thought they had a lot more interesting sequences throughout the thing, like the clock tower scene was super cool. And it's not, I guess it's not as memorable as being in like a sinking ship or whatever, but just the amount of animation and insanity that was going on throughout the the entire sequence as you're falling down.
That one definitely stands out for me too.
And like the biggest one of the game, they kind of spoiled by showing it at E3, but you guys did a video of trying to break it. But that whole chase with the Jeep is still really cool.
Lucas writes in from Texas. He says, after playing through the entire game, I have to say that Chapter 11 is by far the high point when it comes to set pieces. The combination of surviving the bell tower and then having the exhilarating escape chasing in the Jeep had my blood pumping. What's interesting to me is that Reiner pointed out in his review that he felt like the game didn't have a big memorable set piece like the train or airplane sections in previous games, and I guess I disagree.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, it's interesting because they're like, well, we've done trains, we did a plane, we did a boat. They're like, what's left? Like, I guess a giant chase scene, which actually totally works. Like, you're like, well, cars aren't as exciting as like a train, but I don't know. It was pretty cool. I thought.
You mentioned it, but I will briefly plug that I think a nice companion piece of this game club is Jeff Cork and I went through that sequence and just tried to find the edges of it.
And I talked to you like right after that, after we recorded, I played it, and I have a way deeper appreciation for that after running through it successfully, after seeing like all the weird stuff kind of around the edges, like you say.
Yeah.
And I want to say too, like that scene at the bell tower right after that, when Rafe calls you on the phone.
Yeah.
Like that was a cool scene, but also I was just blown away with the camera, and I was like, I can't think of that many games where they're cutting from this scene to Rafe in the car and then back like in a movie. Like it just felt like, and it's all done in real time. Yeah, the phone conversation.
Okay,
And they did it a couple times throughout the game, but I was just like, that really just impressed me again.
The thing, first of all, I'm a stupid man. That puzzle, it was one of those things where I'd like just forced my way through the first part, like whatever, I don't understand these rules, but I guess I got it. And then it's like, oh, here's 4 more layers where it gets more and more complex about rotating the little pieces in your notebook and slowly setting this stuff up. I had the most trouble with that in the game, but I eventually got it. But the phone stuff in particular is really interesting to me because they like, I guess he had talked to Elena on the phone, but cell phones weren't really a big part of the game up until that chapter. I think that's in chapter 11 then. Yeah. And suddenly it's like a lot of phone stuff and him talking to Sam and the controller vibrating for Sam texting you and him like taking pictures of stuff and sending it to Sam. Where earlier in the game I had thought with the big map of Madagascar, like, oh, he should whip out his phone and just take a picture of that. But then the fact that kind of jarring phone being forced down your throat in this chapter paid off with the idea that Rafe had hacked it and got Sully's number and whatnot.
Yeah, it was a nice, was it the third one where the one English guy was talking about his limited voice plan and like he didn't want to use his minutes.
In the third one?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Oh, I don't know. I like that part a lot.
Did puzzles stand out for you guys? Do you have favorites from the second half here?
I like the one puzzle where you have to walk on the platforms just so it blows up. And I love the first time that you see it, where you see evidence of, I know you guys were talking about it earlier, like people are always one step ahead of you, but you can never see where they are. And you follow the muddy footprints and you're like, all right, here we go. And then you have to do one yourself. I like that puzzle. It wasn't like...
That was good.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say I liked the one that you really struggled with.
Oh, I love that one.
Turning
Yeah,
the
that was
pages
cool.
and
I like the
stuff
idea of
that,
incorporating the
texting.
notebook more, I guess, but it was just overwhelming at first for my dumb brain.
This is the moment that I felt the stupidest is like after the muddy footprint one, I felt super cheated. I was like, there's clearly a puzzle here that like I wanted to do, and they're just like letting me walk through it. And I want to know what the rules were here. What was this puzzle?
Yeah.
And I did not have the forethought to think like, well, they're obviously going to give me another one later. I just thought that it was like I was a little bit disappointed and thought they were kind of cheaping out on the puzzle by just letting me go through it.
Yeah.
So
another favorite moment here, we have, who is this? Barbara writing it again saying, it's pretty silly, but one of my favorite things in the game was from the beginning of Chapter 11. Chapter 11 really has a lot packed in it. I bought an apple from a vendor, and a little ways down from that, I pet a lemur.
Oh, yeah, I did that too.
As I was walking away from the lemur, it jumped up on me and stole the apple out of my hand. This led to a conversation between Nate and Sully about how Nate wanted to get a dog. Did you not have the dog conversation?
I had the dog conversation. I didn't buy the apple though. I just saw the
completely with
lemur.
you, yeah. It did something really smart where I went over and pet the yak, which is a nice callback to Uncharted 2. And then like because they know where you are, then it rotates the camera around and it's this great moment where like this woman runs into Sully and all her apples go spilling and then like Sully has to pick it up. It's just a nice exchange between Sully and this random other woman.
That's cool. I did like the scene where he runs into a vendor selling all the shirts that he wears. Did
Is
you
that
guys get
true?
that? There's
No.
a scene where he's like, "Hey, Nate, you want to buy me a shirt?" And it's like the exact shirt he's wearing.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
with like the
Oh,
weird
right,
patterns
right,
on
right.
it.
Yeah.
That marketplace was absurd with how many people are there, and I love that in the photo mode you can turn off all the people as well. Just to,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Also, this is really nerdy, but on the Idle Thumbs podcast, they're obsessed with this. But in the photo mode, you can turn off enemies and turn off allies at any point in the game. And they were just digging around with it, apparently. This is like Jake Rodkin specifically, who worked on Firewatch and Walking Dead and stuff. But he was talking about how they were so obsessed with tweaking it and just going in blind to the start of this game. The first scene where they're in the prison and Rafe is there and they're playing dominoes, they paused it and said, hide enemies. And then Rafe just disappeared. Like in this cutscene, so it like revealed that he was bad. And before you knew anything, it's like, all right, I guess this guy's turning on us because clearly he's an enemy because the photo mode spoiled it for
I
me.
mean, I think that's pretty obvious that Rafe is pretty terrible from the outset.
His voice is too good. Yeah.
Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, someone wrote in says Steve Buscemi, but it is not Steve Buscemi.
He sounds exactly like Steve Buscemi.
He sounds
it does
Steve
have that
Buscemi-ish.
sound for sure.
Yeah, like a Steve Buscemi guy. Let's see. A lot of people wrote in about the supernatural stuff.
So glad.
Yeah. Okay, so Jason writes in and says, Uncharted games have always had the supernatural twist about 3/4 of the way through. All 4 had was exploding mummies. Were you guys surprised by this? I was actually kind of relieved, LOL. And then Garrett writes in from Nevada, hello, there's something that confuses me about the Uncharted series. I've heard you guys repeatedly think it's weird that it's supernatural, but Indiana Jones has plenty of unnatural stuff in it. This is just the genre. Stop complaining about supernatural stuff.
I don't mind the supernatural stuff, but it's always done in a way that is not fun.
The bullet sponge angle, yeah.
Yeah, it is terrible.
Yeah, the supernatural. It's not so much. I don't think people would complain about the supernatural twists in those if they were presented in a way that was entertaining to play, or that like didn't feel like the story was just going off the rails at that point.
That's
like if,
not a Yeti, it's an immortal blue guy.
Yeah.
It's not a Yeti
Yeah.
suit.
Oh, hang on. Lone Gamer here actually has a point there. He says, I'm here to tell you that none of these games ever had supernatural twists. The first game was a contaminated corpse inside of a golden idol that caused people to go insane, pretty much a biological weapon. The second game was special sap produced by a tree that gave people increased strength and resilience to injury. It was pretty much a drug. Finally, the third game, it was supposedly a gin in a large jar, but it was just a chemical weapon stored in said jar. So therefore, there is no such thing as supernatural stuff in Uncharted. But
But this
clearly,
one felt more grounded. Went with the more grounded route.
There
which
were
I
no
actually
pirate
appreciated.
skeletons,
I know. I'm happy about that, but still. I was waiting for it. Oh, the animations would have been so good when you smashed them and they'd fly apart.
Speaking of things that we're glad that weren't in the game, one of the things that I was a little afraid of going into this, especially the second half, was that like it being clear that it's the last game in the series. I was afraid that there would be a temptation to try and wrap up or touch base with a lot of like other loose ends from previous games.
Totally.
Like, I was waiting for like, oh, here's Chloe showing up in a biplane and saving us from something, or like who knows what. you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. It's amazing they didn't use Chloe. I understand that's a whole can of worms emotionally for Nathan and whatnot, but there's one quick reference to Cutter early on where Andre's like, oh,
Which I
that's
kinda
what
like that.
Cutter's for. And then-
Yeah,
I thought maybe he'd show up again. Actually,
Yeah,
after that.
a reference and like staying in universe, I think, is one thing. But like you think of, I don't know, like other games. I feel like a game like Metal Gear Solid 4 or something, wrapping up the Solid Snake story, really goes out of its way to just like shoehorn everything from the series in there. And I'm glad that this one sort of was like, you know what, Chloe is complicated when it comes to like Nate and Elena, and we really want the spotlight on them. So let's just,
Well, I think it did a great job.
wave that off.
You didn't really talk about it in the first episode. Shut up, Ben. But I think like the opening credits though, where you see Nathan's sketchbook, and it's just all those awesome moments from the Uncharted series. You know, and then you see when he's in his attic, he's interacting with all these things that if you hadn't played them, you'd just be like, oh, he's got a bunch of cool old crap. But you're like, wow, that's that skull that he got here, and this is that thing that he had here. This was a huge part of that plot. So I think that fan service is definitely there, but it isn't just characters popping in like you're saying and like, hey, you owe me that beer. Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between, I think, an acknowledgement or a recognition of like where the series has been versus the fan service of just like I mean, that feels inauthentic. Just trying to like shoehorn something in.
Yeah. Let's get to the final boss here. Brad writes in and says, on the final boss, I didn't like it. I felt the left-right system was flawed and not fun. The concept of sword fighting the villain felt pretty dumb to me, though I guess you could draw parallels in the, they're both just dirty pirates or whatever, he says. Despite this, the very end where Rafe gets crushed by a pile of treasure was a satisfying death for that asshat. I am so glad there was no BS supernatural bullet sponge creatures this time around. Good job, Naughty Dog. What did you guys think of that final setup and the final fight and all that?
I like the final fight in concept. I like the idea of them fighting while the pirate ship is burning down, and that was a really cool idea. But it didn't. Yeah, it wasn't as fun. Like the mechanics weren't as fun. And I compare it to there's a couple of scenes where you fight Nadine, fist fights, and I always thought those fights were really cool actually, because you kind of the mechanics are a little bit more simple, but then there's more like spectacle going on around it.
Because you end up like sliding down, then you get to eventually to that
yeah, especially the one where you and your brother are fighting together.
You both
that
take
one's
her on, and
really
she's
cool.
kicking both your asses.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun, but this one didn't work as well, and they didn't have as much like spectacle to go along with it.
I think it looked cool, but yeah, it all coming down to new mechanics at the very end is a little bit jarring. It reminds me of like, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but let's say Metal Gear Solid 2, just to go back, sword fight at the end. There's another certain Batman game that ends with a sword fight at the end, and it's like, well, if they're gonna go for it, I want it to be really fun. And when it comes down to just hit the right button, it's not.
And it's not always just sword fights either. This is just a problem that I don't think anyone likes it when a video game does this, which is the like, hey, instead of using all of the skills and all of the things that you've been doing in the whole game, instead of what the game is about, we're going to drop some like weird new sort of clunky mechanic on you. And that's what the culmination of the adventure is. And to me, that's always disappointing, no matter what the game is or the format.
It took me a couple tries that I felt like I just kind of fumbled my way through it. Like I had to like stop and think, do I really know the difference between left and right? Because it kept telling me like this way. Then I was watching like the way he was telegraphing it. Just for whatever reason, I had a really hard time reading it.
You got to look for the camera flashing in the background. I think that's the cue.
The guy with the beard.
Yeah, that's when you attack.
And it was I think it was also really repetitive too. Like you got the mechanics instantly, and then for me there was a lot of just like both of us standing there. And I'm like, okay, like. Are you going to attack me at some point here?
Sam coughing every once in a while.
It was just a very long sequence, and you're just basically going left and right.
Yeah, and
waiting for the final blow the entire time.
Yeah, and Uncharted's not a series where they like throw life bars up at you or anything, but that also means that you're kind of like, am I doing this right? Am I missing a thing? Because like I didn't actually die in that sequence, but it went on like probably twice as long as I felt like it should, and I kept wondering whether or not I was is there some like gimmick in the environment that I should be using that I'm missing, or like because like especially when you even succeed or fail, all the animations are sort of. They're the same things basically over and over again too. So it just
it was like the fist fights with the guys in the laundry room or whatever. When you're breaking out of jail, where you're like, do I need to move you over by the wall? Is that
let's mosey on this way?
I keep hurting you, and it's not enough.
I did love it. I love Rafe in general. I think a lot of it's just that performance. Turns out I like Steve Buscemi a lot.
Yeah.
But I loved his line right when you start fighting, where he goes, "Come on, legend." It's like, it just seemed like a really cool.
I did like I'm not going to be able to enjoy any of this if you're still breathing. Like it's just like I was like, oh, that's a pretty good thing to say.
Yeah.
I do love the fact. This may be getting a little into epilogue stuff, but
sure.
Like I was wrong last time when I said that Nathan is finally just going to get the whole haul. That
of
he's
course.
Gonna, but they got some of it.
He did get a pretty.
They didn't get fabulously wealthy.
It was the perfect amount.
Was
but
it
they got
implied
the
that
right
they
amount.
went back though and got it all?
Oh, that goes to another point though.
What?
No. I think the idea was that like Sam, as they were escaping, managed to like grab a lot and
I got
slipped
that
it to
part of it.
Elena.
Yeah.
Right.
But like Ben hits on a thing that to me seemed ridiculous: is that they're willing to fly all over the world and go through all these ancient traps or whatever. And now you know exactly where millions of dollars is, and you're gonna let I guess there are some rocks on that.
There's a spooky Rafe skeleton down there.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I thought it was just sort of implied that they did go back because there was photos of them with all that treasure and stuff. I don't know.
Really? In the epilogue?
Well,
Like on
and
the
they
fridge
have
or
an
something?
amazing house that probably costs millions of dollars that's right on a beach. I don't know.
I don't know if I got that. I think
how did
just
they
their
afford that?
scavenging business worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, I got the idea that like that house on the beach probably cost $50,000 because it's so far away from civilization.
There's so much detail. I'm surprised you can't find the contract for how much that house exactly costs. Before we get to all that stuff, let's see. Just the ending in general. Nathan writes in and says, the biggest surprise for me is that there really wasn't a big surprise. I was fully expecting the death of at least one main character and a same betrayal. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy that my beloved characters lived, but I'd mentally prepared myself for the loss of one or more of them. Also, I didn't really consider Sam coming clean on the made-up drug lord story to be a big reveal. I think it was a decent reveal. I think that they would lie through gameplay is an interesting concept, but I was convinced that Sully was going to die during that dog reference. When he's like, we'll name the dog Sully. This is in chapter 11.
Oh, you
towards
thought
the
like
end
that was the reason that he was going to die?
Totally, because I thought like Sully was going to die, and then at the end you see a dog, and its name would say Sully, and you'd be like,
In memoriam.
Yeah, exactly.
His soul goes into the dog.
Blake Willis writes in and says, I found the game to be a bit dull on the story. To start off, why do these characters feel the need to lie to each other? Because it tells a good story.
You ever watch a sitcom?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
never did pay off, by the way. I never ended up believing why Nathan like did not come clean to Elena about that.
I think they talk about it where he's like, oh, I didn't want to hurt you or something,
I
and
know.
she goes, that's BS. Like,
Yeah.
you couldn't handle me when I would actually, you couldn't win the argument.
He has a moment where he says that he was protecting himself and not
Exactly.
her. Yeah,
It's
and I
someone
think
wrote
that was-
in with a very lengthy comparison to Breaking Bad, which I thought was an interesting analogy as well.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know they tried to explain it. It fell flat for me.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, so Blake writes in and says, I think the ending leaves way too much wiggle room for a sequel for Drake and family. Honestly, I think Nathan should have died at the end. After Nathan's dishonesty with his wife, his brother's dishonesty with Nathan, and how high the stakes felt, it makes sense that he would get into trouble he couldn't get out of. What is stopping a new character from taking his family hostage in another game? What's really stopping him from going on another adventure?
Naughty Dog?
I don't know. I mean, yeah.
I guess I guess to me, like I can see where he's coming from, but to me, like the larger tone of the entire series and like this fantasy adventure kind of feeling would make that really weird to me if you just killed him off at the end.
It does feel like Naughty Dog just wants to be done with it, though, too. Which I'm fine with. I'd be happy to have them do something else. But I was kind of thinking, like, well, they got a kid. I wonder if they would just, like, all right, now she's an adult and she's an adventurer and kind of spin off the series in a different direction, which I don't think they would do, but, like, I was just kind of...
I'm sure like Sony Bend will make one for the PlayStation 6 or something that stars
I just
Cassie.
think, in 10 years, maybe we'll get a resurrection in some way.
of Rafe.
Making Elena a widow, I don't think accomplishes anything other than just being like, well, that's done. You know what I mean? I think that it's far more interesting to leave it open-ended and just think about, like, what happens next and leave, like, the player to kind of be able to imagine that.
Yeah, and Jeff, I know you'll appreciate this. This is for me like a pet peeve in all kinds of storytelling across media but like the show that's the worst about it is 24. In that there are certain things out there, like certain shows or stories that like have no viable way of sunsetting characters other than just killing them.
Yep.
You know? So like in 24, there's no character that ever is just like, well, he's like, I'm not in the show anymore because I retired.
Yep.
Or, you know, hey, I wanted to spend more time with my family, or I got a different job somewhere else. It's just like, they feel the need to, like, in order to just preclude that character from ever appearing again, it's just like, well, we got to kill him.
Yep.
Death all the time. And like,
They're on their like retirement fishing boat, and then it explodes.
yeah, exactly. Which is why I particularly like what they did with Uncharted. The idea that like, because like gaming does this a lot too, like the big dramatic death moments and stuff. And I like the fact that like, no, there's a way out for characters that isn't just like, you know, getting killed for dramatic effect.
And it's a more understated ending too. And I think Naughty Dog has proven themselves good at that with The Last of Us as well, where it's like you don't have to go to the extreme. People rarely go to the extreme in real life, and you find these kind of middle grounds or compromises or whatever.
Well, Caleb wrote in and said he's disappointed that no one died, and he wanted the ending to be emotional, and his reference was The Last of Us.
I think it was plenty emotional.
Yeah, I thought it was emotional in a good way, like upbeat and happy, which I like from the series. And like, I really loved Last of Us's ending. And so I was kind of maybe expecting something a little bit darker, but I'm actually glad I think Joe said this, they went the other direction and kind of kept it upbeat because that's what this franchise has always been.
I was a little bit disappointed disappointed, or is this kind of like a sitting back, like, okay, that seems like a fine ending, when it was just them buying the company and basically the sunset moment, which is also how Uncharted 3 felt at the end. It's a very similar structure. And then the epilogue is where I was like, okay, getting to explore one more awesome environment that the Naughty Dog artists apparently just couldn't help themselves after like one more amazing little moment.
Another messy house.
Yeah, and people love exploring messy houses. I am fully on board for that, and that was such a cool house and such a cool scene.
And how much did that house cost, Naughty Dog?
Though I do want to say, little nitpicky thing.
Yeah.
There's no way in that environment, like a beachfront environment, that a PlayStation 1 would remain in working condition.
Oh, if you have to flip it upside down.
You've got the sea air in there. All it's just gonna the insides of that are just gonna oxidize. It's just gonna be awful. There's no, unless they just have a stock of like old PS1s.
Because they're millionaires.
They're millionaires.
I actually came to the same conclusion that Reeves did. That
that they went
back and got a bunch of treasure.
Oh, you said you saw a picture, Reeves. Is that?
Well, it's just the picture of them standing with the treasure at the end. That
I think that was from like Uncharted 1, though. That was like an earlier photo of all of them. Yeah, it wasn't too late. But
I still think it's a reasonable assumption, even without that picture, though.
It would be insane for them to run a salvage operation and that never to have crossed their minds.
Yeah.
We have all this scuba gear.
That's exactly what I thought too. Like you escape the cave, it caves in or whatever, and it's like, well, he works at a freaking salvage company. Like, you had an entire segment where he went underwater to like pull up, crap from a
That's true.
train crash that like.
I hope so too.
And then the fact, I guess, to continue re-explaining what Reeves said, but like the fact that they live on this island that is apparently, I assumed it was their island, I guess, was my conclusion that I came to, since they're the only ones who live there.
They named the island Sully.
When it first pulls out from the TV, I was like, okay, they're back in their house. But then there was a window right next to it, and it's like, okay, palm trees, like these guys are living it up.
They moved to California.
Private island, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
guess
it's basically the Harry Potter ending, which I'm on board for. Like, hey, let's just show that they have kids, that life goes on. And
So we're gonna get a play in like 5 years.
yeah, exactly.
I wanted to say like something that Ben said about like, hey, the ending just leaves you upbeat and sort of like and positive on it. For me, I don't know. Like after I finished that game, I went online and I bought the Nathan Drake collection, even though like I played all those games. I don't know that I ever need to play them again, but like something about like if that series had ended on a downer, on a big death or something, like that would have been affecting, but in a very different way. And like the way it ended now left me with just such a fondness for those characters and for that series that I was like, you know what, I want to like support this. I want to have all of this all in one place.
That's interesting.
It's like I feel like if they had ended on a downer, I maybe wouldn't have had that same sort of I don't know, like desire to like revisit or encompass the whole thing.
What? Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, one other. This is kind of a different, related to the ending, but different. I also really liked when their daughter finds out about the thing, and they kind of joke about they have to have the talk or whatever. But I like the tone of it where this is clearly something that they had been hiding from her because they have probably mixed feelings about it, and they probably think it's dangerous and not something that they want to like pass on necessarily.
Well, they bought a cupboard with a lock on it. That takes a lot.
Yeah. But then also you get like, you see from Elena's perspective like the excitement that Nathan has to kind of pass on these stories now that they think that she's old enough. And I thought that was a really, really interesting kind of exchange.
Yeah. I like that also after the game, you can play through the game again with like the old Drake skin, just a little bit more gray in the hair. And then I like seeing characters age that way. Cool.
Well,
dad
the
shorts.
multiverse. Let's go back to the multiverse. Yeah, you're actually.
Can we talk about that last environment a little bit? And actually just wandering around the house. Yeah, there's like I don't know if you guys went up to the fridge, but there's a lot of really fun notes that you can read. Can someone turn Joe Juba around, because the look on his face when I said that.
Okay, it just seems like a weird thing to do a deep dive on, but yeah, let's do it.
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was awesome. Like, there's a little note on the fridge about like Sully trying to quit smoking. You get a letter from Sam and Sully, who we should mention are now best buds, inseparable.
Can't get enough of each
legally
other.
wed.
How many dog biscuits did you give your dog?
I actually didn't do that at all.
You can really do two, I think.
Yeah.
I thought
and then the
I thought I
dog
gave him a
explodes.
3, yeah, and then he puked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see
You can eat the puke.
Did you see the Last of Us poster in her room?
What? No.
There's a Last of Us. It's called Last of Us American Daughters. And I don't know
So
if
it's
that's
like a movie or something, or
it's unclear what it's a poster for, and maybe it's an Easter egg.
does it
and
have
they're
like
gonna-
Joel and Elena on it, or what? Or
It's
not
Joel and Elena making love. Yeah,
That's the ultimate crossover.
They're like Mario characters. They're actors.
Right,
So
that's
they can,
right,
They can
yeah.
trans-
Yeah.
I know it just has a picture of Ellie, and I forget if there's another lady on it as well. But it'll be interesting to see if that's what they end up naming the Last of Us sequel. Not that it's necessarily that. But there's just a lot of really fun stuff walking around that house. Like you can go and you can get an apple. And then I just happened to walk down the hallway again because I really soaked in that environment. And she'll
a
like take
lemur
a,
stole your apple.
that's right. She'll take a bite from the apple and then just like casually toss it in the garbage, just naturally. And it was such a crazy environment. I loved it so much, except for the dog barking, where it was the same sound loop just repeating constantly for me because I was really trying to avoid it. It's like all of these details. Just record like at least 4 different dog barks, please.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I just played through the beginning of Last of Us just a couple of weeks ago
You mean
too.
the best beginning ever?
It is the best beginning ever, and it was just nice to see a very similar setup. Like, hey, where is Dad and Mom in this case too? Mm-hmm. And obviously, tonally, a lot different. It ends a lot better for everybody.
I just saw him this morning.
Yeah.
He made coffee for me.
Yeah, I wonder if they were just like on their whiteboard when they were like, "How are we gonna end this thing? Let's just do the Last of Us thing. We already did the photo and we did the squirt gun fight, so let's go
Copy
for it."
paste code, I think is how it works.
Did
over
anybody
there.
else have trouble with Crash Bandicoot jumping over some of those?
Yes,
wooden
I did.
posts?
I almost
what
died.
the heck was that?
That was Crash Bandicoot.
Is that how it was in the original game? I don't remember
It's-
having
it's
that much
tough.
trouble with that.
Yeah, those
Like
games
getting
are tougher.
stuck on it though. Like I would jump and get stuck.
Oh, I guess I didn't
on
get
the
stuck.
post.
I missed the jumps a couple times. I got done to Last Life, and I was like, "Oh, please don't let me botch Crash Bandicoot, one of my favorite games." In the recorded version of this for YouTube. Turns out, at the end of the game, they give you stats. I love that they include the stat of how many times you shoot an enemy before he can throw his grenade and blow up. That happened 3 times in my game. And Nathan Drake for me killed 568 people.
Hey, just another day.
Just another day. That's what I wanted from that hotel scene. Is when Elena finds out he went on this adventure, for her just immediately be like, "Tell me how many more, Nate. Give me the death count.
That's what she's worried about.
We're gonna have a daughter someday, damn it."
murderer.
Also, I think that's where it cut off. Is then Nathan Drake went on to explain to the daughter how many people he's murdered.
Killed
also.
so many dudes.
Sometimes you want a treasure, and there are other human beings in your way.
Now,
and
let
you
me-
just have to kill them all.
Let me show you these catacombs where I keep all their femurs.
Yeah.
These are the hands of the people I had to murder for their treasure.
Overall, oh
real quick, the dresser that you're going through.
Yeah.
Was there? I had only gone through like half of it, and then I picked up the book, and that kind of triggered the end. Was there anything else interesting in there?
I think there was something from each game.
it was basically the attic.
Yeah,
again,
it seemed like
kinda
it was all the same stuff from the attic.
They
just
packed
like
it up in a
again.
box and
But
brought it
like
over there.
it's it's interesting how just even though you as a player are looking at the exact same things, it's interesting how the angle of that changes when you're doing it as a different character. You know, like when you're doing it as Nathan, you're thinking back to like, oh, I remember when I played that game. Like Nathan's sort of a proxy, like your proxy in that situation. And I like that. Like when you're playing through it as a different character, you're not thinking about your exploit. Like you've already thought about your exploit. So when you're doing it, it's interesting to. There's more of like a sense of discovery going on with it.
Yeah.
Even though it's the second time, I think that's cool.
Chris from Chicago writes in and says, "Now that we've all finished it, how do you feel about replaying Uncharted 4? I beat 2 a bunch of times, but 4 seems like one of the games that I don't need to revisit. There are fun sections I might play on occasion, but the slow pace in so many of those sections don't feel like they'll hold up for another full playthrough. The early parts of the game were necessary to set up the story and were well done, but is walking around in an attic a fun gameplay experience you'll need to experience again? The shooting isn't exceptional compared to the competition. I think I'm done with this game, at least for a couple of years."
I never replay Uncharted.
Yeah, I don't. I was actually when Joe's talking about the Uncharted collection, I'm tempted to go back and start at 1 again and just play through the whole series again.
Yeah, and I think that's a situation that I would do it in. Is like I like having the whole thing, and someday I will go back and replay the series. But like these games have never been those for me that I feel like I need to go back and play again.
Yeah, good luck replaying Uncharted 1.
Yeah, doesn't hold
That's
up.
really not great. Not great at all. It's nice that Sony had the confidence, like, let's give them another shot.
Man, but back then it scored pretty well, and I don't know, maybe it's just sands of time through an hourglass just
Also,
changes things.
A dumb thing I noticed on the series level, but it like I don't know, kind of a funny thematic thing is that games naming conventions sort of like follow a little pattern where it's the first one is Drake's Fortune. then it's Among Thieves, then it's Drake's Deception, and then it's A Thief's End. So you've sort of got the Drake thief sort of
It spells dada,
thing going on.
which is a spoiler because he is a daddy.
Oh, there you go.
there you go.
It planned from the beginning. I don't know. Like, that's
Yeah.
not a thing. It's just, hey,
Hey, not a thing, but hey, I'll say it.
there you go.
And yet you're a monster for looking at the fridge.
Is that a wrap?
That game's really good.
I feel like
Yeah.
we talked about all the major points.
Yeah, someone wrote in talking about how it was their least favorite Uncharted because it was too emotional. And they're like, I don't want to go on an adventure where Nathan Drake, it seems like, doesn't even want to go on it. But I think the emotional beats are what makes this my favorite
I don't
Uncharted
know.
for sure.
Has he played the first one recently?
Well, I don't know. But a lot of really brilliant stuff, which we've covered.
I did want to bring up, just to get an opinion from you guys on it, is that, like, I know, so Reiner and JV on the site did a debate, basically, that was like, hey, do you need to play the previous Uncharted games to play or enjoy the fourth
Who
one?
was on which side of that?
I think JV was saying that you don't need to, and that Reiner was saying that you should.
I think he's insane. Like, I think you have to play them.
You have to play them.
I really think. I mean, like, if you just, I guess it's tricky because, like, if you just want to play a game that has some gunplay and stuff and some like cool cinematic stuff, yeah, you can play Uncharted 4. But like, more than any other, or like, this is definitely in the top tier of series that like you really need that foundation to appreciate what's going
I
on.
fully appreciate. I think if you're looking just for like a great action game on PS4,
Yeah,
you can totally dive in and get a lot of the beats. Like, they do a good job of brushing you up, but I would recommend very least watching like the YouTube movie cuts or something. you
But I
know?
mean, like the viewer said there that like it's part of the reason it's emotional and why that's one of the major takeaways from the game is because it leans so much and assumes so much about the player's previous experience with these
Right.
characters.
Sure,
like,
but
you know?
but every other minute you're also in a shootout or like everything's crashing down around you.
I mean, I feel like
to
there's.
me,
I mean,
it's-
like Hansen said, he only killed like 500 some people. I feel like that's actually way less than in some of the previous.
And if you just want a shooter, like there's other places to go that have better shooting mechanics.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Just
but
want, like,
not,
shooter
but
action.
not in terms of like nonstop action. I still feel like playing through this game, there were probably a dozen times where I was like, okay, that was super cool. And like, we're all super jaded here, I think. That like, this series has always kind of been like that summer blockbuster kind of thing. And there is a lot more emotion in this one, which I do think you will get a lot more out of if you have played them. But I think if you're just a normal person who wants a fun game, like it's still a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
It's like watching The Force Awakens without going and watching the other Star Wars films. I think you might still have fun and it's a good adventure, but like there's so much built on that.
I think if
Yeah,
you
I think
had-
that's
you
a
would
good-
really
that's a
need
good
to
analogy.
because I made a point of playing the Uncharted games for the first time actually, like in their entirety before I started Uncharted 4. I'm so glad that I did because I would have had a fine time if I hadn't. But just the amount of like again that opening sequence where you see like all those awesome moments sketched out in the credits, like the amount of joy I felt was like disproportionate for what was on the screen because it's very simple, but at the same time I was just like I felt like I'd earned the right to be there rather than just like jumping in the middle of the most current season of
Sure.
Game of Thrones and
Yeah.
being like, hey, who's that guy? What's that guy
yeah,
saying?
not this, of course it's better, but I'm saying it's not worth missing out on if you don't want to replay.
I think you're
Uncharted
wrong.
1.
I think it is better to the point where it is worth playing through.
buy
all
the
of them.
Uncharted collection for the same price and play 3 games. I mean, you just played them. Like 2 and 3 still hold up pretty well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're
Mhm.
fun
Yeah,
games.
they're great games,
So
yeah.
go play them.
All right, Chris Bartlett also wrote in talking about Reiner specifically, I guess, where in Reiner's review, and I think on this podcast, he says that it's the best looking game ever made. Where do you guys stand on that debate?
It's a really good looking game.
It's, I mean, artistically, factoring everything, probably, I still think maybe
It's really good.
just fidelity wise. I'm trying to think of something on PC recently, but Order still stands
yeah,
out
the
to me.
order is really good looking.
I think I might take Order.
I don't know. Like to me, good looking is always so weird because you're not just talking about like graphical quality. You're talking about like art direction and the way like
That's
the way
the
it's all
thing.
presented. So it's like I don't know. I don't like assigning the sort of like, oh, this is the best looking game ever because that always sounds hyperbolic. Even if you believe it to be true, that just like it sounds like you're just going too far.
Joe, yes, and Juba. Great.
But-
All right. Is that a wrap for Uncharted 4 Game Club, everybody? Oh, also, there's a multiplayer mode.
I played a few matches and it is okay.
Do they have at least like trying not to cry faces as like the game over screen from the losing team or anything that would make it?
It's actually like there's a bluffing game where you keep telling an elaborate web of lies and try not to make your significant other weep. That's great.
All right, that's it for this game club. We got a ton of great emails. I didn't get to all of them, obviously, but thank you so much. And a sincere thank you to you guys for sticking around and for Jeff Cork joining.
And thanks for hosting, Hanson.
Oh,
and
hey,
coming
my
in
pleasure.
with a notebook of notes.
Hey, and thanks to everyone who's listening and watching.
No, don't think that.
And thanks to Naughty Dog for making this game.
And thank you, Amy Henning.
Thank you, everyone. The next game club, there's a lot of debate about what it's going to be, obviously. So stay tuned. We'll make a shorter gap than between the first two. I'll promise that. And we'll make it multi-platform. I'll promise that, because a lot of people wrote in about that, and I totally get it. Probably not going to be as new of a game as Uncharted 4, but we don't really know what it is yet. But we like the format. We'd love feedback on what you want to see from the future of the format and stuff like that. Throw out game suggestions. We've gotten a lot so far, but there's been a couple that have
Just
struck me out
keep
of the
playing
blue.
games. Maybe you'll get lucky.
Absolutely, and that's
Keep
good.
playing games.
Good life advice in general. All right, guys, thank you so much, and thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next time when we'll have a new episode waiting for you. Bye, everybody.